Hello, my name's Declan O'Riordan and I work for Test and Verification Solutions as the head of security testing. I've been involved in IT now for 34 years and testing for 27, but my speciality over the years has become application security. And the purpose of this executive briefing is to make you more aware of security, and I'm going to particularly talk about the asymmetric economics of security spending. So looking at the numbers that are being spent and invested in cybersecurity, HP estimate for 2014 was $46 billion being spent, and the accountants haven't checked that figure, but it's almost certainly approximately correct. And nation-state spending on security is another area not included in that figure, and for this year that's estimated to be 120 billion. So very large amounts of money are being spent, and it's growing at about 20% a year, the investment in cybersecurity, and yet it's not causing the problem to decrease by 20% a year. That's actually increasing, and there were 20% more breaches in 2013, and the cost per breach is rising at a rate of 30%. So even though we're spending more money, we seem to be fighting a losing battle. And that brings me on to the asymmetric economics of security. And the first person I thought of when I thought of asymmetric economics was Jim Kirk, and from the program Star Trek in the 1970s, because he could go around the universe solving interplanetary problems, and he even always got the girl because he was the captain of a starship. Despite that little bit of a belly you can see there going on, he had a very powerful tool for problem solving. But you know, it's a fictional story, and we have no idea what a starship would cost. But I'm sure people would like to have one. But you know, starships are not actually an option for us. And if they were, they'd probably cost the Earth to buy one. But we do look for that kind of solution. Is there a starship solution to our problems? And we can see it in the current world, that we're currently in our country engaged in building 2 aircraft carriers, great big ships that will carry supersonic, radar invisible jet fighter bombers, each one of which costs around £150 million over its lifetime. And the contract to build these aircraft carriers was announced in 2007, signed in 2008, and the first one will probably enter service in 2020. So about 13 years from deciding we want a solution like this to the first half of the solution being delivered. And you know, should we need to fight World War II again, these would be perfect solutions. If we need to retake the Falkland Islands again, this is the kind of equipment you want to have at your disposal. But unfortunately, that's not the kind of war that is fought anymore, or maybe fortunately, but certainly a nasty aspect of modern warfare, or certainly this kind we've been experiencing for over 12 years now, is asymmetric warfare. This is the kinetic warfare. I don't really like using the term cyber warfare because it's not really warfare. It's a kind of a struggle, and people don't physically get hurt the way they do in these kinetic wars. But you can see from these images the sort of things that the bad people are using to fight us in a kinetic war are landmines, and aircraft carriers and supersonic radar invisible jet fighters really, even if they were available, which takes 13 years to get them available, are not effective in countering that threat. And when you look in detail at these pictures, the landmines are being made in some cases from artillery shells, which obviously are not manufactured by the people putting them under the road. You wouldn't go to the trouble of making an artillery shell to then stick it under a road in a ditch or something like that. These are stolen artillery shells. They're taken. And one example of many huge ammunition dumps that have been looted is the Al-Qaqa, I probably haven't pronounced that right, site in Iraq. that was inspected by the UN in 2003, and they found 377 tons of high explosive weapons. But they were looking for weapons of mass destruction, so they just put chains on the doors and a UN seal to show people that they shouldn't go in there, and then just left it unguarded. And a year later, it was inspected again, and it was empty. And that's happened many times. And even though that was noticed, it had been looted in 2004, the BBC News published a report 10 years later in 2014 that another huge arms site has been raided. So the bad people are using weapons against us that they're not even paying for to a large extent. So they're fighting a totally asymmetric war. It's costing them almost nothing. They're using our own side's weapons against us, and we're spending huge amounts of money on equipment that is not effective. And how do I relate that to cybersecurity? Well, here's a good example. Distributed denial of service attack, for example. A script to run a denial of service attack that could swamp a system that has a multi-million pound perimeter defense system, a system that's been has many people working on the firewalls and the intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems, could be attacked by a $20 script bought from the dark web. And the dark web is sometimes confused with the deep web. It's totally different. The deep web is a reference to the very large volume of information in the internet. But the dark web probably makes up about 0.01% of the internet. But it's the marketplace for criminals. It's not an entirely evil place, but things like WikiLeaks set up servers in there for people to download confidential documents anonymously, so they couldn't be traced back to their source. And I mean, there's some dubious morality, but it's not as bad as the bad things that go on in there. A company that was shut down recently was Silk Road, and they were actively selling drugs, guns, smuggling services, hitmen, and malicious software. So if you want to conduct an attack on a company, you could, if you're a hacker, there's a specialist supply chain, and you can buy the services of people who've written scripts for specific types of attack. So that gave the example of a denial of service attack, maybe $20 for a really good script that will create a new type of attack, something called a zero-day vulnerability. They could pay a lot of money, I mean over $100,000 for something like that. And then the money would be laundered in bitcoins and fraudulent bank accounts, and using counterfeit credit cards and debit cards, etc., all of which are exchanged through the dark web marketplace for criminals. So in this denial of service attack, one of the features is that it's not the attacker's computers that are actually doing the bulk of the work. The script starts out an attacker's machine and then goes through handlers to then compromise many thousands of honest, decent people's PCs, but they're PCs and computers that are vulnerable because they haven't applied the right application security measures. So once they're hijacked, people unknowingly are taking part in attacks on other companies while malicious scripts are running through their computers and on towards the target and denying the service at that target by swamping it with information. But also even other types of attack, not denial of service, will bounce off honest people's computers who unwittingly are taking part in an attack due to a lack of their own security measures. And hence we see bad news all the time about security, and spoiled for choice on stories to tell you about. But certainly before Christmas, a lot of people heard about Sony being hacked and confidential emails leaked to the press. Then the Sony PlayStation network was brought down so children couldn't play their games over the Christmas period. The same thing happened to Microsoft's network. JP Morgan had a huge data breach last year, still being investigated. Adobe had a massive data breach just over a year ago. The Heartbleed story about how SSL had a vulnerability for years that wasn't discovered was in the news last year. And CNN had a report a few months ago that the Russian criminals had stolen 1.2 billion passwords, which is the biggest breach so far, but I'm sure it will be beaten again soon. And even though Bitcoin is the currency of exchange for criminals, it's also ironically a target of attacks. So Bitcoin exchanges have been attacked several times, and several of them have been destroyed and bankrupted by cyber attacks. And an example in the middle there, CodeSpaces, that was a company that sold a supposedly secure hosting service to its customers based in the cloud. And they were notified by an attacker that the attacker had control and was demanding a ransom to be paid in bitcoins. We don't know the exact figure, but it was a large ransom demanded. And CodeSpaces decided to call the attacker's bluff, and they've identified which account was being run by the attackers and booted them out. But then the attack went up a notch, and the attackers had already installed backdoors in the code and administrator accounts in the backups, so there was no way to actually effectively kick them out, and they began deleting all of CodeSpaces' data, including the backups, until CodeSpaces was totally destroyed, and it is no longer an operating company. And that kind of thing happens very frequently, but we don't hear about them so often because they're smaller companies, and if they can afford to pay the ransom, a lot do and never tell the public, or if they can afford to cover up the breach, that would often be the case because companies don't like explaining to their customers that the data's been stolen or they've made a mistake in security. But certainly there's a lot more going on out there than the general public hear about. And one of the problems is the vast increase in unstructured data moving around in the internet. In 2010, it was 1.2 zettabytes, and in case you're wondering what a zettabyte is, I put a little table in the center of the image there to say a zettabyte is one off a yottabyte, and I grew up thinking a yottabyte was as big as things would ever get, but at this rate we're going to have to come up with more words to expand the scale, because this year there's probably going to be 7.9 zettabytes of data in the World Wide Web, and by 2020, 40 zettabytes. So unstructured data is exploding at a rate of about 60% year-on-year growth, and that's an awful lot to try and deal with and separate the good from the bad. There's about 1.2 million variants of malware per day, malware being malicious software. So traditional pattern matching defenses are struggling with this because they're looking to see, is this message that's moving through the internet coming into my business something that's known to be bad? Is it a recognized signature that we've seen before and are now trying to block? But because there's 1.2 million variants, it's constantly changing, and these pattern matching defenses are constantly trying to catch up by reacting to breaches. It's very hard for them to be proactive. There is a type of defense that will put suspicious messages into a virtual environment and then monitor it to see if it tries to do anything suspicious, like escalate privileges to administrator, and then it would kick it out before it could actually get into the real environment. But some of this malware is clever enough to spot that it's been put into a virtual environment and then won't run the malicious code until it has been considered to be safe and moved on into the real environment. So a lot of the malware is very sophisticated and very hard to stop. And firewalls only offer limited protection. They pretty much say, where's this message coming from, where's it going to, do my rule set allow that? And that needs people to constantly configure that rule set. The antivirus solutions in the top right-hand corner of the slide show there's plenty of people in that marketplace, plenty of businesses offering antivirus solutions, but the honest truth is antivirus really peaked in effectiveness at about the year 2007. Before that, there was a time the people who worked in antivirus companies would be aware of every new virus that came out, and there might only be about 5 per day, but the rate kept going up. And now at 1.2 million per day, it's impossible for any human, to keep track of that. So a lot of the responses are automated, and there's only a minority of malicious software actually caught by antivirus. And then we have, in the bottom right-hand corner, intrusion prevention systems. So they're the things that are looking for suspicious code, but again, it's all pattern matching and looking for anomalies, and a lot of malware is too clever for it to be detected by the intrusion prevention system. And the bottom left-hand corner, intrusion detection systems, they need constant monitoring to see if they've spotted is something strange happening in our network, is some data moving out of our database and heading to Russia, and is something odd happening. But again, attackers are clever, and they would establish a pattern very gradually. They would not send all the data in one go. They would usually start a pattern on a certain time of a certain day and then build on it. So the intrusion detection system gets used to seeing that movement and doesn't think it's anything suspicious. And there's many other ways they could circumvent these kind of defenses, and do. So HP sort through 2.5 billion security events per day. Obviously, there's no human can do that. There are humans who will look at some of it, but a lot of the defenses are automated, and automated defenses always have their weaknesses because they're kind of general purpose and not dealing with specific issues a lot of the time. The antivirus solution is only catching 20 to 30% of malware, and because these conventional cyber defenses are based on reactive pattern matching, they miss all the new types of attacks. So attackers, if they want to succeed, will often mix a catalogue of known old scripts with new zero-day scripts, or something called obfuscated attacks, ones where they've changed something in a way that makes it hard for the pattern matching, or impossible for the pattern matching defenses to spot them. But we have many drivers to have secure systems, and the Data Protection Act is one of the key drivers in this country, the United Kingdom, to secure data and not reveal customer data to anybody who shouldn't be seeing it. So we should be building secure systems, and there are many standards and compliance models that assist us in this. And the Turnbull report has been replaced since September last year by the Financial Reporting Council's guidance on risk management, internal controls and related financial and business reporting, which is basically saying to the executive level, you need to assess the realistic risks that face your business and make sure that you're managing them. Otherwise, there's executive liability for these problems. So that's a driver for us having security, because if they don't properly assess the risk of attackers getting into the data and abusing it, then they're liable for that mistake. There's also many ISO standards, including the ISO 27001 Information Security Management System standard, and many others. I mean, things like ISO 27799 is the guidelines for exchanging and managing information security in the health sector, and so on. There's many specialist ISO standards, and I began to wonder when I was looking at all these, do policies and recovery plans really stop hackers getting into systems? And the short answer is no, it doesn't at all. There are some, they have good uses, and for example, to reduce the insider threat, it's good to have policies in your company that warn employees that if they misbehave and steal data or do something malicious, then they will be punished or lose their job and that sort of thing. So the insider threat is somewhat reduced by having compliance standards and policies in the workplace. But for attackers in the outside world, especially places like Russia where there's no extradition treaty, they don't care at all about those policies. They are simply looking for vulnerabilities in your software and your configuration, and that's how they attack. So we can see that over the last few years, something like insider misuse is a fairly flat line low down on the threat landscape. Social engineering is increasing. That's worrying. People are being tricked into supplying data that is then used against them. Malware, malicious software, is rising pretty rapidly. This is definitely a serious threat. And then there's the hackers themselves, people who are hacking into the computers using bespoke skills. That's rising at a rate of about a 45-degree slope. This is clearly a golden age of hacking. And despite all the money that's being spent to defend our computer systems against the cyber threat, it's hardly having any effect on this growth in hacking because, in my opinion, it's being spent in the wrong places. And why is this the case? Why are we so vulnerable? Well, the history of the World Wide Web is not good for security. The paper was written in 1989 by Sir Tim Berners-Lee and his Belgian colleague, who I'm afraid history has forgotten. And Sir Tim Berners-Lee put the first World Wide Web server live in December 1990 and wrote the paper reporting his results in 91. And shortly after that, an explosion in commerce began because of the invention of the World Wide Web. It's a fantastic thing and does a lot of good. But it was designed for academics at CERN to view static HTTP pages. It's not for dynamic Java pages and not for e-commerce, not for online banking. It wasn't designed in the first place for almost anything that we use the World Wide Web for now. And by default, it's insecure. Unless security is applied pretty much as an afterthought, then by default, everything about a web application is vulnerable. And unfortunately, a lot of websites and applications are built in very vulnerable states because people are rushing to get things live. They're thinking about the commercial possibilities and they're thinking about what would a customer want to do in our system rather than also thinking what would an abuser like to do in our system, what would a malicious evil person want to do with this system. So instead of only thinking of the use cases, they should be thinking of the misuse cases, but that's so often missed. We very commonly build vulnerable applications. And another way we don't help ourselves is only a small example. Password security is to do with authentication, and it's often handled very badly. This was the 2013 bad password list, and it's published by Splash Data, who compile this information by looking at all the hacked accounts where usernames and passwords are published, particularly in the dark web, but sometimes they arrive elsewhere, and user accounts are up for sale. So there's many, many millions of accounts visible in the internet, and unfortunately the most popular password in 2013 was 123456. And just this week the Splash Data published the 2014 worst passwords, and I'm afraid that's still at the #1 spot. And password was pushed off the #1 spot for the first time in 2013. So it looks like 123456 is going to be up there for a little while now. These are all terrible passwords, and shockingly admin was at number 12 there, so there's a lot of administrator level accounts that are going to be found very quickly by attackers because they know that these are the worst passwords and the most common passwords in use, so they will try this and a list of many hundreds of others when trying to break into your system, and they'll pretty quickly get in because this password compliance complexity is not required in many places, particularly internet accounts like Facebook and LinkedIn and so on, things like that. Corporate accounts usually do require some password complexity, so it would typically be 8 characters, of which at least 3 out of 4 complexity levels need to be applied. So it would be uppercase, lowercase, and some numbers and maybe some special characters. But I've just written an article actually, which you can find the blog on the TVS site or on LinkedIn, my LinkedIn profile, describing the fact that hackers know that when people are required to do that, they follow topologies, patterns of behavior, and everyone thinks they've got a unique password, but actually most would put the capital letter in the first character. They'd then follow it with 5 lowercase characters and end with the digits. So I've written an article that explains what the ratio is. It's about 45% of people would follow the top 5 topologies, and about 85% would follow the top 100 topologies. And password complexity certainly needs a lot of work, and that's an area where you could very quickly make it harder for attackers to guess passwords by changing the complexity rules. And thinking about who is attacking us, there's, in reverse order there's people who are just doing it for fun, and sort of youngsters would call it the lulz, L-U-L-Z. So they're not really a serious threat, but they can cause problems. There's hacktivists, who are the sort of people who have like ideological reasons for doing malicious things like defacing a website. Again, they can do damage, but they're not highly skilled generally, and they're not a serious threat. The two most dangerous areas are financially motivated criminals and espionage, which is often nation-state espionage, but sometimes it's corporate espionage. And those two are very skilled often and do a lot of damage. The Ponymon report reckoned the average breach cost was $7.6 million last year. That's somewhat skewed towards American companies, big American companies, and I would say in the UK it's around £100,000. But still a lot of money to lose, and these things don't go away until you build secure systems. According to Reuters, almost every Fortune 500 company has been hacked. Won't know it until 6 months after the breach, but it would very much depend on the type of attack, and the 6 months is a rough rule of thumb. There's actually some figures that are coming up that will give more detail on this. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got an example for a point-of-sale intrusion. Now, these are particularly prevalent in the Americas because they don't use chip and pin transactions for point-of-sale. They're using the magnetic stripe and the track2 data, which appears in the clear within the RAM chip on a point-of-sale device, and attackers know that. So it would only take them, if you look at the top left-hand part of the table, to compromise a system. In other words, how long does it take an attack once it's launched to get into the system? Over half are in within seconds, and then most of the rest within minutes. They're into the system. And exfiltration, that's how long does it take to get the data out that they want, the information, say it's credit and debit card details, that would be gone within minutes. So it's very hard for a human to react to these kind of problems. If you don't have a self-defending system, then we're down to human responses, which are just too slow to deal with this. And discovery, 85% are found within weeks. And that isn't usually because there's some inbuilt system like the intrusion detection system spotting the problem. It's because after a few weeks, people start complaining that their statements have got a lot of transactions on them that they don't recognize. And the police start picking up criminals who've got many counterfeit white plastic cards in their pockets that are being used for fraudulent transactions. And those people will then go to the card issuer and say, this is not right, something's wrong here. And that's the moment of the discovery of the breach. And then it has to be tracked back to the source. And some of them, they're 13% months, so it's a very poor situation there. With web application attacks, the picture's slightly different. The time span moves to the right a little bit. Things take a little longer, but these are much more prevalent. There's a lot more web application attacks, especially in Europe, than there are point-of-sale intrusions. And you can see here that although 19% of compromises only take a few seconds, 42%, the largest amount, take minutes, which are still very quick. And the exfiltration, it shifts to the right here, so they're more careful about taking the data out. It would tend to be a larger volume of data, so they would take it out bit by bit and build up a pattern that the intrusion detection system doesn't notice. And over a period of minutes to months, nearly all the data is gone. And discovery, here, 41% take months to discover. And there could be many reasons how it's discovered, but I believe actually, although it says 0%, are never discovered. That's because, I think that's a statistical anomaly. Actually, there are accounts which are never discovered, particularly cyber espionage, where a nation state is spying on the research and development of a company, and they're very hard to kick out and very hard to spot that they're there as well. But say the discovery has been made several months into the attack, maybe 6 months if we take the Reuters figure, then it then has to be dealt with. So containment, again, can take days, weeks or months. It takes a long time to discover how have they got in, how do we stop it, how do we write new defences or create new defences that prevent this, and then make sure, test them that they're not going to introduce new vulnerabilities, and then apply them, and then mop up the damage. So it's a big problem. It's a very expensive way of solving cybersecurity problems to react to them rather than to build the defense in the first place. And an example I'm going to give, which is a pretty colossal example, is Target, the retailer in the United States of America, that was attacked just before Christmas the Christmas before this one. And the attackers were pretty smart, and they were probably using a new script that they possibly bought from the dark web. But it was an organized attack, and they didn't go straight at the target systems. They went in through their air conditioning and ventilation supplier. They sent an email to somebody who worked there at the air conditioning supplier, who thought they recognized the sender. They clicked on the email, it downloaded a malicious script, went through the heating and ventilation supplier system down to target system. And as a retailer, the typical situation is that they have a hub and spoke architecture. So once the malicious script had arrived at the hub, it should have been prevented if there was many mistakes made. But one of the things it shouldn't have done is given the heating and ventilation suppliers access to their domain to be any more than it needed to be. It should have been just enough access to submit invoices and do some other essential activities. Instead, it was given a very wide range of access, which allowed the malicious script to then travel through the hub system and up through the spokes to every retail outlet and every point-of-sale device at all those retail outlets. So it's many thousands of point-of-sale devices. And it then installed itself in the RAM chips and began scraping debit and credit card information off the RAM chips as shoppers were buying things in the run-up to Christmas. And it then began, after a little period of time, it began the exfiltration of taking the data that it had gathered and sending it out to the criminals who appeared to have been in Russia. And they obviously disguised their IP addresses by spoofing off other ones to start with, but it has been tracked as far as Russia, so that's the most likely area that these criminals were operating in. They can't be touched by phoning the police. So the intrusion detection system, which Target had just spent $1.5 million on, actually did spot the data leaving because there was such a large amount going. And an alert was noticed by an employee in Bangalore who sent an email to the headquarters in America saying, we appear to have a breach and data is leaving. But the company was so focused on sales and taking in money, it just wasn't a priority to deal with that alert, and cybersecurity wasn't taken seriously enough. So the exfiltration continued for another 3 weeks, and many millions of account details were stolen, probably 110 million account details. And eventually law enforcement got involved and said that, typically the price of a stolen credit or debit card on the dark web is $100, and the price has been driven down to $40 in the last few weeks because of the huge supply of stolen debit and credit card information. And the one common factor is all those people have shopped at Target. So there has to be something wrong in your system. And then Target began their investigation, and the news got out through investigative reporting, and there was a 46% drop in sales, and the CEO and CIO were sacked. There was a horrible mess there, and it's cost the banks in the States about $276 million to reissue all the cards and compensate their customers. So with a highly litigious society, the potential cost to target when it's all said and done is about $1 billion. So that's not the sort of place you want to be in. And in fact, I'm told that the Target organization has pulled out of operating in Canada, and one of the reasons is that the damage they've suffered from these losses is hard to deal with. So let's look at the ratio between the kind of security incidents that happen and the number that lead to successful breaches. So by an incident, I mean as events that adversely affect the information assets. So somebody is trying to do something and it's detected that something bad is happening, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a breach. A breach is when you have a confirmed data compromise and they have stolen something of value or changed something. So in 2013, the figures were that something like insider misuse, for example, 18% of incidents are insider misuse, and this gets a lot of publicity, but it only leads to 8% of breaches. So they need to try insider misuse a lot more times than they have success. So then there's other situations where, again, they're trying like crimeware. It needs quite a lot of crimeware to lead to a successful breach, but the ratio is different in other places. We can see that perhaps because of things like the Target breach, POS intrusions, less than 1% of incidents, but 14% of breaches. So it's highly successful technique. And espionage, 1% of incidents, but 22% of breaches. So again, this is something where when these people attack, they're good and good at what they're doing. They're not good people, they're skilled, and they have a high probability of a very good return on their investment of attacking your system. And worst of all is web application attacks. 6% of incidents, but 35% of breaches. So this is clearly an area where we should be providing better defenses, defense in depth against this sort of thing. The perimeter defenses are simply not working, and we need to build much more secure web applications, not spend more money on the intrusion detection, the intrusion prevention, the firewalls. Having those things is great. They're very useful at blocking some attacks, that's particularly denial of service attacks. But a lot of crafted malicious scripts are coming straight to that web application to get at the data and then do something bad with it. And it would depend which industry you're in, how you're attacked. So for most businesses, web application attacks are the most common attack vector. That's how they will come and do damage. But there are differences. So with retail, it's the point of sale attack, and accommodation, which again they're using point of sale devices. If it was something like real estate, as they call it in America, or estate agents, or perhaps even recruitment agencies and consultancies and so on, it's the insider misuse in those cases that is the biggest threat. So the defenses have to be customized for the business you're in. Depending on what kind of industry you're in, you will be attacked in different ways, and you need to defend in different ways. But the important thing is to understand this difference between the web application security and the network security. That most of the money spent these days on cybersecurity is spent in the middle there, the network security. And that is, as we've seen, of limited effect. And the analogy I like to use is that sometimes technology reaches a dead end. That in the early part of the 20th century, all aircraft were driven by propellers, and there was a huge technical effort to make airplanes fly faster. Everyone saw the benefits of faster flight, and they went as far as they could with it, with this Tupolev 114 that could fly at about 540 miles an hour. But beyond that, it just isn't possible to go faster with propeller-driven planes, because the tips of propellers become supersonic, and there's all kinds of vacuuming problems, and they just can't go any quicker. If you want to fly faster than that, you need to have a different technology completely. So something like a jet or a rocket engine will certainly take you beyond those speeds. So no matter how much you spent on faster propeller-driven planes, you won't get any faster than this. No matter how much you spend on perimeter defenses, attackers will still get in. There has to be a different kind of technology defending you from the security threats. And that actual defense is all well known about. It's the application security is a clearly identified area that should be defended, and defended in depth, and there's many ways of doing it. But unfortunately, according to the Open Web Application Security Project, 98.3% of the money is spent elsewhere, and only 1.7% spent on the applications. I see different numbers in different research. So the Ponemon Institute, they would say that the application layer is receiving about 15% of the spending. I think it's difficult to get at hard and fast scientific figures because there's many organizations with different profiles, and not everybody's sharing information, but certainly the relationships are always the same, that much more is spent on network and perimeter defenses than is spent on the actual applications that are doing the job of processing your data. And in fact, attackers don't want to destroy the network, they want to use it, much as those sort of insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan so want to use our ammunition against our side. Hackers want to use our networks against us to get at the web application. So the last thing they want to do, if they're serious about criminal or espionage activities, is bring the network down. They want to keep it up and use it as a transport layer to get into the applications and into the databases, and then move that data out or change it in ways that gives them an advantage. So that's the asymmetric economics. We're spending money that's actually not blocking the main problem. And the constraints we need to work with is there's actually a shortage of skilled security staff. The Cisco report last year said there was 1 million unfilled security jobs, and those are the jobs that we know about. Those are the ones that have been recognized as needing filling. So most of those will be, again, in perimeter defenses of the network. HP estimate that 40% of security roles remain vacant. So skills are in short supply, and where there is knowledge, it tends to be concentrated in network silos, in that network architecture. The security teams work very closely with the network people. They don't tend to come into the project teams and give advice to project teams on how to build secure web applications. And of course, there's always limited budget, and we need to think about where we're spending it more. Training's rare, and most people I've worked with in IT have no training in security at all. Some of the training courses are very abstract from the projects that people are working on, and knowledge retention can be poor depending on the mix of learning speeds in the classroom. And yet, design flaws account for 50% of vulnerabilities. So a lot of people are designing systems that simply haven't considered what an attacker is going to do to that system once it goes live. And developers are building a lot of applications with insecure code because they're just not bothered about security. And why would they be? Because the testers aren't testing for security because they don't know how to test for it either. So the priority is to just get the system live and start pleasing customers with doing what customers want to do, much as Target were thinking. And until their billion-dollar breach happened, they were only interested in getting customer transactions through the system, and they weren't concerned with cybersecurity. So there's things that are sort of like token gestures towards security are penetration testing, but that's usually too little and too late. You can't build security in at the end of a project with some penetration testing. It will find some vulnerabilities, but that's not the same as building security in by design. And in the opinion of myself and TVS, we believe the project team have to take up the slack. We have to shift the burden of cybersecurity into the project teams more. So to do that, they need to know what cybersecurity is and how to defend the system. What are the threats? What are the controls to prevent those threats? And how do they prevent building systems that are full of vulnerabilities? And there are known ways of doing this if we just take the time to do it. So we could look at, okay, who are the threat agents and what are the things they're after? What would be the assets they want to get to? And what would be the impact to our enterprise if they got to them? And therefore we can prioritize. What do we need to protect? and how do we protect it? What security controls do we put in place to block these weaknesses that are there by default? And then we can test that those controls are effective. And that's what application security is about. It's about verifying that the controls are effective and that the security requirements are being met. But you have to have security requirements. If you're building a system with no security requirements, you're building a system with no security. And something to get people started, we've written web application security testing procedures and application security development guidelines for the programmers so that they can understand the Open Web Application Security Project's top 10 application security flaws. And that's a great place to start. It's free. If you go onto the TVS website, you can get these for nothing, and it will explain in fairly plain language what these things are, how they could affect you, and how you can stop them. But we shouldn't get stuck with the OWASP top 10. Those are a great place to start, and it's very hard to leapfrog that knowledge. I think everybody needs to have at least that basic knowledge if they're involved in a project that's building applications. But you can move well beyond it, and working with TVS now, we use the standard. There's the only standard the Open Web Application Security Project have ever come up with is the Application Security Verification Standard, and it has 168 checkpoints, of which some will be non-applicable to each business. So if you have, for example, no mobile functionality, no mobile apps, then that's 27 out of the 168 would be out of scope. And there will be other examples, but depending on the business, up to 168 checkpoints that need to be checked. And this is part of what we do in making sure that your system is genuinely secure and complies with the standard. And that's by, for example, going through these checkpoints for application security. So authentication will be at a simple level, verify all pages and resources require authentication except those specifically intended for the public. But then at a higher level, verify all authentication controls, including libraries that call external authentication services, have centralized implementation, and so on. And there's 168 of these, and we find them very useful. But the most important thing is to make use of the assets you have. Don't stay reliant on external advice from security experts. Get knowledge transferred into the project teams by whatever means you can. And I suggest coaching is the best way, but also training is very effective if it's done in the right way and it's tailored for your business and the problems you face. And absolutely for sure, challenge insecure designs. If testers are presented with requirements to test that are simply a list of user requirements with no security features, then they should hit the alarm button straight away and say, we haven't got security built into this system. And once testers start announcing that they are testing for security, that lets the developers know that it's in scope and they need to start building security into their code. Because if it's not in scope, if they know that nobody's testing it, they more than likely won't build secure code. Or it will be built in a haphazard way where some people are doing it because they're very professional and other people are not doing it because they don't consider it important. And it's important to separate doing the tests that you can from those you can't. If those that you can't, there's something sophisticated like breaking cryptography is a specialist job that you'd need an expert to do, and you'd probably bring in someone from the outside to do that. But there's many security tests that can be done by the people in-house once they recognize what those tasks are. And we also need to spread awareness and skills. If anybody knows something useful, they should be sharing that with their colleagues and getting the whole project team, everybody from the project manager, the architects, the business analysts, the developers, the testers, whatever you call those roles. If you're in an agile environment or waterfall or iterative, it doesn't matter. Anyone who is building a system or testing a system should be aware of security and at least to a certain level and aware of what you don't know as well. And those are the points where you can bring in external experts in a proper targeted way rather than simply saying come in and find out if attackers can get into my system and you've got 5 or 10 days to do that. That's not well-directed cybersecurity testing. So this is the end of my presentation, but hopefully you will find this useful, and I'd like to think that in a few years' time those slopes we saw of a 45-degree increase in hacking will be heading in the opposite direction, because for sure if everybody starts building security in by design, it would stop these attacks, and that's what we need to do. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll be doing more presentations again in the future. Goodbye.